Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Dark History Podcast, where we delve into the darkest parts of human history. I hope you're all well. I'm Rob, your host as always, and you're listening to Season 5, Episode 12. Last time, we talked about a song, a piece of music that was blamed for suicides, banned by governments, whispered about in dark corners. We talked about Gloomy Sunday, about the men who wrote it, and about the people who died listening to it. It was strange. It was unsettling. But it was also, in its own way, distant. Something that happened a long time ago, in a world that doesn't exist anymore. Tonight, we're coming to something more closer. Something that doesn't feel distant at all. Something that sits in the pit of your stomach and doesn't leave. Tonight, we're talking about Albert Fish. If you don't know that name, I envy you. If you do know that name, you're already feeling it. That chill. That sense of something wrong. Because Albert Fish is one of those figures that doesn't belong in the human world. He looks like a human. He talks like a human. He walks down the street like a human. But inside, there's something else. Something that should not exist. He was a killer. But that word doesn't cover it. He was a serial killer, yes. But that doesn't cover it either. He was something worse. Something that makes people who study these things for a living look away. Something that makes a hardened detective put down their files and go home and hold their children a little tighter. He killed children. That's the simplest way to say it. He killed children, and he did things to them that I'm going to have to describe. I don't want to. I've been putting this episode off for weeks because I don't want to. But the point of this podcast has always been to look at the darkness, not to look away. To understand what humans are capable of, even when it's terrible, even when it makes you feel sick. So I need to warn you. This episode is different. It's not about a massacre far away, or a plague a long time ago, or a song that might be cursed. It's about one man. One man who lived in New York City in the early 20th century. One man who looked like a grandfather, who talked like a kind old man, who charmed his way into homes and then did the unthinkable. His victims were children, some as young as 4. He killed them, he hurt them, and in some cases, he ate them. I'm going to tell you about Albert Fish, about his life, about his crimes, about the trial that shook America, and about the question that no one has ever been able to answer. How does a person become that? What happens inside a human being to turn them into something that should not exist? So, settle in. Or maybe don't settle. Maybe stay a little uncomfortable, because this is a story that shouldn't be comfortable. This is the story of Albert Fish. And of course, it's more dark history. Let me take you back to Washington, D.C., in the year 1870. The country was still recovering from civil war. Ulysses S. Grant was the president. It was a different world. And on May the 19th of that year, a baby boy was born to Randall and Ellen Fish. He was born Hamilton Howard Fish. He was given the name Hamilton after a distant relative, the politician Hamilton Fish. But he never liked the name. As a boy, he had a dead sibling named Albert, and he wanted to take the name for himself. There was another reason too. When he was placed in an orphanage as a young child, the other children gave him a cruel nickname, Ham and Eggs. He hated it, so he became Albert Fish, the name we know today. His family background was troubled from the start. His father, Randall, was a riverboat captain on the Potomac, but by the time Albert was born, The old man was already 75 years old, 43 years older than his mother. Mental illness ran through the family like a dark thread. One of his uncles suffered from mania. A brother was confined to a state mental hospital, and his sister was diagnosed with a mental affliction. 3 other relatives had mental illness. Even his mother had oral and visual hallucinations. The seeds of what Albert would become were already there, waiting in his blood. When Albert was 5 years old, his father dropped dead of a heart attack at the 6th Street station on the Pennsylvania Railroad. His mother, suddenly alone and unable to care for him, did what she had to do. She placed him in St. John's Orphanage in Washington. That orphanage changed him. It broke something that never healed. He was there until he was nearly 9 years old, and in that place, he later said, "That's where I got started wrong." The beatings were unmerciful. He and other boys were stripped and whipped in front of each other. And something happened inside young Albert. Something that shouldn't have happened. The physical pain began to give him erections. He discovered that he enjoyed it, that the hurt felt good. The other boys teased him for it, but he couldn't stop the way his body responded. He saw older boys doing things to young ones, things that no child should ever see. And all of it, every bit of it, was shaping him into something that would one day terrify the world. In 1880, when he was nearly 10, his mother finally got a government job and was able to take him out of the orphanage, but the damage was already done. The patterns were set, the hunger for pain had been awakened, and it would only grow. When he was 12 years old in 1882, he began a relationship with a telegraph boy. A boy a little older than him. That relationship opened doors that should never have been opened. The older boy introduced him to practices that most people can't even imagine. Drinking urine and eating feces. Albert started to spend his weekends in public baths, where he could watch other boys undress. He would hide in the changing rooms, peeping at young male bodies, feeling something stir in him that he didn't understand, but couldn't resist. By the time he was 20 years old in 1890, Albert Fish had made his way to New York City, and it was there, in the great sprawling chaos of the city, that he truly began to descend. He became a male prostitute. He said later that he'd also begun raping young boys during his time. The urges that had been building since childhood were no longer being contained, and they were spilling out. His mother, desperate to save him from himself, tried to do what she thought was best. She arranged a marriage for him. In 1898, when he was 28 years old, he married a woman 9 years younger than him. A respectable wife, a normal life. They would go on to have 6 children together. Albert, Anna, Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry. To the outside world, Albert Fish was becoming a respectable man. He worked as a house painter. He supported his family. He had a wife and children. He went to church. He looked like everyone else. He wore the mask that he would wear for the next 30 years. But the mask was a lie. Underneath it, nothing had changed. He continued to molest children, mostly boys under the age of 6. He chose victims he thought would not be missed. Children with mental disabilities, African American children, children from poor families. He began to frequent brothels where he could be whipped and beaten. He asked the prostitutes to tie him up, to hurt him until he bled. The pain, he said, felt like music. In 1903, the mask slipped for a moment. Albert was arrested for embezzlement and grand larceny, and he was sentenced to time in Sing Sing prison. The New York Times even reported on his arrest. And even behind bars he didn't stop. He continued to have sex with other men while incarcerated. When he was released, he returned to his family, to his job, to the mask, but the darkness inside of him was only getting darker. In 1910, he attacked a 19-year-old man named Thomas Kedden in Wilmington, Delaware. The two had been in a sadomasochistic relationship for about 10 days, when Fish took Kedden to an isolated farmhouse, tied him up, and began to torture him. His intentions, he later said, was to kill him and cut him into pieces. Instead, he cut off half of Kedden's penis. He later remembered the man's scream. "I shall never forget his scream," he said, "or the look that he gave me." He dressed the wound, he poured peroxide over it, kissed Kedden goodbye, and walked away. He never found out what happened to him. In 1917, his wife left him for another man, a handyman named John Straub, who had been boarding with the family. She took all of the furniture. She didn't even leave a mattress for the children. Albert was left alone to raise 6 children by himself. And in the wake of that abandonment, something else broke inside of him. He began to hear voices, hallucinations. At one point, he wrapped himself up in a carpet and explained he was following the instructions of John the Apostle. He began to mutilate himself. He would push needles inside of his groin and abdomen. He would beat himself with nail-studded paddles. He would douse wool in lighter fluid, insert it into his anus, and set it on fire. When he was finally arrested years later, X-rays revealed at least 29 needles embedded in his pelvic region. He had been putting them there for years. He also began to develop a growing obsession with cannibalism. He would prepare meals consisting entirely of raw meat, sometimes serving it to his own children. He began to have fantasies about eating children, and in 1924, those fantasies began to turn into something else. He heard God's voice. He said, commanding him to torture and mutilate children. He bought his implements of hell, a butcher's knife, a meat cleaver, and a small handsaw, and he went looking for victims. Now, this part is distressing to read, never mind to hear. So if you want to skip, it's fine, because the story gets a lot darker from this next section. You have been warned. The first known victim, as we know, was a man named Thomas Kedden, a mentally disabled man who lived in a state institution. Fish lured him to an abandoned farmhouse, stripped him naked, beat him with whips, cut off half of his manhood. He left him there, tied up, and walked away. Kedden did survive. He told the authorities what happened, but Fish was never caught. He learned from that experience. He learned that he needed to be more careful, that he couldn't leave witnesses. He started to prey on children. Children who were too young to fight back. Children who were too trusting. Children who saw an old man and thought he was safe. He would find them in playgrounds, in parks, on the streets of New York. He would approach them with a kind smile, a gentle voice. He would offer them candy. He would offer them money. He would tell them he needed help carrying something, that he had a job for them, that he had a surprise at his house. And they would go with him, because he looked like a grandfather, because he seemed kind, because they didn't know that the kind old man was something else. He took them to empty houses, abandoned buildings, places where no one would hear them scream. And then he did things to them. Terrible things. Things that I'm not going to describe, because describing them would make me complicit in something I don't want to be complicit in. But I will tell you this. He hurt them. He hurt them in ways that no child should ever be hurt. And then when he was done, he let them go. Not because he was merciful, because he knew that if he killed them, the police would look. If he let them live, they were too ashamed to tell anybody what had happened. He did this for years, to dozens of children, maybe hundreds. We'll never know for sure. He never kept count. He never wrote it down. The children he didn't kill, they grew up with that darkness inside of them. They carried it with them for the rest of their lives. And Albert Fish went home to his family and sat down to dinner like nothing had happened. And then, in 1924, he killed. His name was Francis McDonnell. He was 8 years old. He disappeared in Staten Island. His body was found hanging from a tree. He had been sexually molested, strangled with his own suspenders, and severe lacerations on his leg. His left calf had been stripped, almost clean of meat. In 1927, he killed again, Billy Gaffney, 4 years old. Fish later described what he did to the little boy in a letter to his lawyer. He said he'd picked Billy up and taken him to an isolated house. He'd stripped him naked, tied him up and gagged him. He had beaten his bare buttocks with a leather strap until he bled. Then he cut off the boy's nose and ears. He had slit his mouth from ear to ear. He had gouged out his eyes. And after the boy died, he cut off his head, his arms, his legs. He put them in a sack, weighed it down with a stone, and dropped it into a muddy pool. Then he cut off Billy's buttocks and genitals, cooked them in an oven with pickled onions and peppers, and ate them. There was one case that would finally bring him down, but that didn't happen until 1928. Let me tell you about Grace Budd. She was 10 years old. She lived in New York City with her family. Her parents were poor, struggling to get by. Her father worked as a porter for an insurance company. Her mother stayed home with the children. They were a good family, a loving family, the kind of family that trusted people, that believed in kindness, that didn't know the world had monsters in it. On May the 25th, 1928, Grace's older brother, Edward, placed a classified ad in the New York World. It read, "Young man, 18, wishes position in country. Edward Budd, 406 West, 15th Street." Albert Fish saw the ad, and on May the 28th he showed up at the Budd family home. He introduced himself as Frank Howard, a farmer of Farmingdale, New York. He said he needed a young man to help him on the farm. He promised Edward a job. He charmed the family. He brought them pot cheese and strawberries. He seemed like a kind, gentle old man. The Budds trusted him. He came back several times. He brought candy for the children. He played with them. He told them stories. And all the while he was watching, waiting, looking for the right moment. And then he saw Grace. He changed his plan. He stopped thinking about Edward. He started thinking about the little girl. He told the Budds about a birthday party he was taking his niece to. He said there would be other children there, games, food, fun. He asked if Grace could come. The parents hesitated, but he seemed so kind, so trustworthy, and they let her go. Grace never came back. Fish took her to an empty house in Westchester County. He told her to wait outside and pick wildflowers while he went inside to prepare. He went upstairs and stripped off all of his clothes. He didn't want to get blood on them. And then he hid in a closet and called her through the window. When she came inside and saw him naked, she started to cry, tried to run down the stairs. She said she would tell her mother. He grabbed her. He stripped her naked. She kicked. She bit. She scratched. He choked her to death. Then he cut her into small pieces so he could take the meat back to his room to cook and eat. It took him 9 days to eat her entire body. For years, the Budd family searched for Grace. The police investigated. In 1930, they arrested a retired police superintendent named Charles Edward Pope as a suspect. He spent 108 days in jail before being cleared, but the family never gave up hope. And then, in November 1934, 7 years after Grace's disappearance, a letter arrived at the Budd family home. Mrs. Budd couldn't read. She'd asked her son to read it to her. What he read changed everything. The letter was from Albert Fish. He signed it with a fake name, but he couldn't help himself. He wanted them to know. He wanted them to understand what had happened to their daughter. I'm not going to read you the letter, word for word. Parts of it are too horrible, but I need to give you a sense of it. He wrote about a friend who had gone to China during a famine and learned to eat human flesh. He described how that friend had stolen 2 boys, tortured them to make their meat tender, cooked and ate them. And then he wrote about Grace. He described taking her to an empty house. He described hiding in the closet. He described grabbing her as she turned and tried to run. He described choking her to death. And then he wrote these words. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasting in the oven. It took me 9 days to eat her entire body. I did not fuck her though. I could have if I had wished. She died a virgin. The letter was too much for the police who read it. Some had to take breaks. Some were physically sick. One reportedly left the room and never came back. But the letter had one thing Fish didn't intend. The envelope had a watermark from a company in Manhattan, and the watermark led the police to him. On December the 13th, 1934, the police tracked Albert Fish to a rooming house on East 52nd Street in Manhattan. When he returned to pick up a check, they were waiting. He tried to run. At the street door, he lunged at the lead investigator, William King, with a razor in each hand. King disarmed him. They took him in. He confessed almost immediately. He didn't try to hide. He told them about Grace. He told them about Francis McDonnell. He told them about Billy Gaffney. He told them about the needles in his body, the self-mutilation, the voices he heard. He told them everything. When the police x-rayed him, they found at least 29 needles embedded in his groin and abdomen. He had been pushing them inside of himself for years. He said it didn't hurt, it felt good. His trial began on March the 11th, 1935. The defense pleaded insanity. They brought psychiatrists who testified that Fish was clearly insane. He heard voices. He believed God told him to kill children. He mutilated himself. He ate human flesh. But the prosecution argued that he knew what he was doing was wrong. Otherwise, why hide it? Why wear the mask for 60 years? The jury deliberated for less than an hour. They found him sane, they found him guilty, and they sentenced him to death. On January the 16th, 1936, Albert Fish was executed in the electric chair at Sing Sing prison. The first jolt didn't kill him. The chair had to be activated twice more before he died. He was 65 years old. He had confessed to killing 3 children, but the real number was probably much higher, and some of those children were never found. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this distressingly dark episode. I'm not gonna lie to you, this one was hard. It was hard to write, it was hard to read, it was hard to record. Like I said in the episode about the Baba Yaga a couple of weeks ago, I've put these ones off for years. Literally years. Every time I sat down to work on this, I found something else to do. Some other story to research. Some other episode to write. Because I didn't want to spend time in Albert Fish's head. I didn't want to think about what he did. I didn't want to write it down. Because I absolutely despise stories about kids. Stories where children are hurt. They make me feel sick. They make me angry. They make me want to throw my laptop across the room and go do something else. Anything else. I know I'm not the only one in that. I know a lot of you feel the same way. You've seen the title, you've seen the name, and you think, do I really want to listen to this? Do I really want to know what this man did? And maybe you skip this episode, and I wouldn't blame you. Honestly, I wouldn't. But I had to do it anyway, because this is what we do. We look at the darkness. We don't look away. Not because we enjoy it. God knows I don't enjoy it. But because if we look away, we forget. And if we forget, we don't understand. And if we don't understand, we can't stop it from happening again. There's a part of me that wanted to end this episode differently. Wanted to find some meaning in it. Some lesson. Something that makes it all worth it. But I can't. There is no meaning in what Albert Fish did. There's no lesson. There's just a hole where Grace Budd used to be. Where Francis McDonnell used to be. Where Billy Gaffney used to be. Children who went out to play and never came home. Children who trusted an old man, who smiled at them and offered them candy. Children who deserve so much better than what they got. Albert Fish is dead. He's been dead for nearly 90 years. Fucking good. I'm glad. I hope it hurt. I hope the chair did its job. I hope whatever came next for him was worse than anything he ever did to those children. I know it's not a very podcast host thing to say. I know. I'm supposed to be measured, objective, balanced, but I'm not. Not about this. Not about people who hurt kids. There's no balance. There's no both sides. There's just disgust. Pure and simple. Absolute disgust. But the thing that was inside of him, that isn't dead. It's still out there. In other people. In other minds. In other places where children go missing and no one knows why. And that's the part that keeps me up at night. Not what he did, but that there are others, right now, today, walking among us, looking like us, talking like us, smiling like us, and underneath that mask, something that shouldn't exist. We can't stop it by pretending it doesn't exist. That's what we did for decades. That's what we still do. We don't want to think about it. We don't want to talk about it. We want to believe that monsters are something from fairy tales, not something that lives down the street. But they do. They always have. They always will. So what do? We watch, we listen, we pay attention. We teach our children that it's okay to say no, even to adults. We teach them that secrets aren't always safe. We teach them that if someone makes them feel uncomfortable, they can come to us, no matter what. We believe them. We always believe them. And when someone like Albert Fish is caught, we don't make excuses. We don't try to understand them. We don't write books about their tragic childhood. We lock them away. We throw away the key, and we protect the children. That is the only answer I have. It's not a good answer. It's not enough. but it's what we've got. This episode was hard to listen to. I understand. It was hard to make. But I think it needed to be made. Not because I enjoyed it, not because I think everyone else enjoyed it, but because these children deserve to be remembered. Grace, Francis, Billy, and all the other names who we'll never know. They were here. They mattered. And what happened to them should never happen again. Anyway, I think that's enough for tonight. Rant over. Before we go, a quick word. If the story stuck with you, it would mean the world if you left a rating or a review wherever you listen. That little tap of a star is the single biggest way you can help new listeners find us in the wilds of the algorithm. If you know someone who'd be gripped by this kind of history, please share the episode with them. If you want to support the show more directly, you can find our links to our socials, to our merch store, and our Patreon in the show notes or description below. Our Patreon members get every episode completely ad-free, which is a great way to dive even deeper. Picking up a t-shirt or a mug from the store helps keep the lights on. All of this is optional, but deeply appreciated. If you haven't hit subscribe yet, please do so. It's the best way to make sure you never miss a story. Your support is what lets us keep digging into these dark corners, and we thank you for that. So, with all that out of the way, don't forget if you're looking for another strange story to dive into, check out Dark's Travelling Emporium. Thank you again for listening. Join us next time for our next episode, as we delve into another event, and more dark history.